What would your life look like if you made $100 per day without going to work? Think about that for a second. That's $700 per week, about $3,000 per month, over $36,000 per year. And it's coming in, whether you wake up early or not, whether you go to work or not, whether you feel motivated or not. That's what real income looks like. Not active income, not trading time for money, but building something that pays you every single day. Now here's the truth. Most people think this is impossible. They hear $100 per day and immediately assume it requires millions, or some kind of secret strategy, or extreme risk. But that's not true. Because this isn't about luck, it's about structure. It's about building a system. And once you understand the system, the numbers become predictable. So let's break it down. Let's slow this down and actually walk through it step by step. Because once you see how this works, you'll never look at money the same way again. First, we need to define the goal clearly. $100 per day. That equals $36,500 per year. Not an estimate. A real target. Now the question becomes, how do you build a portfolio that produces $36,500 per year without selling your investments? This is where SCHD becomes powerful. SCHD focuses on dividend-paying companies, which means instead of relying on selling shares, you're getting paid to own them. Now let's talk about yield again. SCHD has historically hovered around a 3% dividend yield. So if you want $36,500 per year, you divide that by 3%, which means you need roughly $1.2 million invested. Now stop right there, because this is where most people quit mentally. They hear that number and they check out. They think, I'll never get there, but that's the wrong way to look at it. Because you're not starting at 1.2 million. You're building toward it. And more importantly, you don't need to reach the full number to change your life. Let's break this into stages, because this is where it becomes real. At $10,000 invested, you might earn around $300 per year. That's not exciting, but it's proof. Proof that the system works. At $50,000, now you're around $2,500 per year. Now it's noticeable. At $100,000, now you're earning around $3,000 per year. Now it's real. You're seeing money show up consistently. At $250,000, now you're around $7,500 per year. Now we're talking about meaningful income, something that can actually reduce your expenses. At $500,000, now you're around $15,000 per year. That's serious. That's life impacting. And as you approach $1 million, now you're around $30,000 per year. You're getting close. Now here's where it gets powerful. Because your income doesn't just grow from your contributions. It grows from reinvestment. This is where most people slow themselves down. They take the dividends early. They interrupt the process. But if you reinvest, everything accelerates. Because now your portfolio is feeding itself. It's growing on its own. This is the shift. From effort to momentum. Now let's talk about how you actually build this. Because this is where most people overcomplicate things. You don't need a perfect strategy. You don't need perfect timing. You need consistency. Let's say you invest $500 per month. That's $6,000 per year. Now combine that with reinvested dividends and market growth. And over time, that number compounds. But here's what most people don't realize. Your first $100,000 is the hardest. Because you're doing most of the work. But after that, your money starts working harder than you. That's when things speed up. That's when it starts to feel real. Now let's talk about mindset. Because this is where everything is won or lost. There will be moments where it feels slow. Moments where it feels like nothing is happening. Moments where you question everything. That's normal. Because growth is invisible in the beginning. But the people who win, they keep going anyway. They trust the process. They stay consistent. And eventually, they reach a point where their income becomes real. Now imagine this. You wake up, check your phone, and you see income deposited. Not from your job, from your investments. That's a different feeling. That's control. That's freedom. That's what you're building, not just money. but a system, a machine that pays you every single day. Now let's bring this back to reality. You don't need to rush. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to start. Even small amounts matter. Even $100. Even $50. Because the habit is what builds the result. The consistency is what builds the income. And time is what multiplies everything. If you want to build $100 per day in income, now you know exactly how it works. Now you know the number. Now you know the process. The only thing left is execution. Like comment, share, and subscribe to Simple Money Compounds. Because here, we don't chase money. We build income systems, and we let that money compound.